This is Beyond the Green Screen, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hi everyone, Royal Norman here. It's Beyond the Green Screen. It's the First Alert podcast where we do weather and climate and everything else that we can think of that is behind the green screen. Get it? That's why we call it that. We have a great guest today from Climate Central, Kaitlyn Trudeau, who's a senior research associate. And Kaitlyn, before we get started on what Climate Central does and how helpful you are to media outlets, et cetera, how'd you get involved with weather and or climate? What brought you to this field?
Yeah, it's a good question. Growing up, I was always really interested in the weather. I grew up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada in California, in a small town called Placerville.
Yeah.
And just beautiful place to grow up. And we had these beautiful, distinct seasons. We get snow in the winter. We'd have nice warm summers. After 3 decades there, I started to really see how much things were changing around me in where I live. And I'd always had an interest in the environment, but when I went to school, it's actually where I went to college at Sac State, I kind of found myself in the geography department because I really liked maps.
Yep.
And it was in the geography department that I really discovered my passion for climate and for climate science. And it's there. I saw a movie called Chasing Ice, which is a great movie, documentary about how the Arctic glaciers are melting. And I remember that day I was like, okay, I'm going to start studying climate science. I want to help with this. So that's kind of how I got in.
Yeah, I'm kind of a big ice guy too. We were talking about that a couple of days ago when we chatted and on the phone, and I was saying, man, I'm so worried about glacial ice and polar ice going away. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But like when you were young, did you realize there was something going on in your little community, in your area, in terms of, weather or climate? Were people talking about it?
People definitely were talking about how things were changing. We stopped seeing snow. We started seeing warmer temperatures extend more into the shoulder seasons. We started to see more extremes, more wildfires, and not just more wildfires we had a really hard time putting out. It changed all around me, and it's really sad to think about, as a child, this place where there were these beautiful seasons, and to think about it now, it's really being impacted by climate change in many ways. So I think that definitely was a big reason why I decided to do this.
Yeah, and you mentioned maps, and I've got to bring up the fact that I love maps like crazy. That's what got me into weather. I can work with weather maps every day and draw lines on them and things like that. It was very exciting. And I want to tell you, my favorite map is, I don't even know how old it is, but it's from the 1700s, and it's a map where they show California as an island. They still hadn't figured out the Gulf of California was a gulf and not just a whole thing that went straight up.
Yeah.
So I love how maps have grown and evolved over the centuries. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And I think what's so great about maps is, some people, they learn by reading books, and some people learn by, visuals. Some people learn by talking about things. But maps are a great way to communicate things to people in ways that maybe you're not I'm going to sit down and read this whole book and then I'm going to learn. Like, maps really taught me a lot about the world around me. So I'm a big fan of maps.
I love maps. I love them. I'm glad you do too.
Me too.
Let's talk about Climate Central for a little bit. What is Climate Central all about? What is sort of your charge, if you will, that you folks try to do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so Climate Central is an independent group of scientists and communicators who research and report the facts about climate change and how it affects people's daily lives. So we're here to help people understand that climate change is here and now. It's not some distant problem for some future generation, but also that there's things we can do about it, right? It's not just all doom and gloom. There's definitely some doom, but there's hope as well. So we're trying to help people understand how climate change is affecting the places that they live, the places that they love, and the things that they care about.
Yeah, and it seems like the one thing that you do well that I've noticed is you produce a lot of graphics, and they're like, for instance, you'll produce a set of graphics about maybe falls are getting warmer, but you'll not produce them just for one city or that, you'll produce 4 of them for Arizona. We'll see Tucson and Phoenix and Flagstaff and Yuma or Prescott. And so you guys do a lot of different cities. Why do you do that? Just to give everybody an idea, like urban versus rural and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So originally, we started our Climate Matters program. It's a free weekly reporting resource program that sends out an email every week that just gives you some local analysis, some TV-ready graphics, some expert resources, kind of helping you understand these stories. And when we originally started, we actually started out in just one market, and then we started to expand by TV market. So we now serve over 240, I think we have 247 markets that we make graphics for, and they're TV graphics based on the Nielsen DMAs because we originally started off that way. So that's where you'll see our markets are basically for those bigger cities in those the US DMAs.
And it can be kind of a hard job to explain climate change or a portion of climate change or warming or more rain more rain more often or less often in a graphic. And I think you guys synthesize it down pretty good. It's a tough job, though, isn't it?
It is. And our graphic designer, Megan Martin, I have to give a shout out to her because she is absolutely incredible. And she'll tell you it's a team effort, and it definitely is. But having a graphic designer like Megan is incredibly useful. She's great. But I think, graphics, it's those visuals that can help people understand quickly in just a couple seconds. This is what's happening. This is why you should care.
Yeah, exactly. A graphic that does that is just perfect, where even if the person doesn't get every little number on there, and sometimes, my dear friend, Kim Quintero, who is one of our former colleagues, she watches all the time, and I try to do a graphic that might be a little too complicated. Like, I get it kind of, but it's too much for the time that we have on TV, and she'll write me a little note. Okay, Royal, that was too complicated. Yeah. So you got to keep it simple because it's got to be understandable, right?
Yeah, you've really got to know your audience, and you got to meet them where they are. We're not here to try to give you guys some kind of lengthy homework course or assignment. Yep. We're here to just really tell you the facts of what's happening, how things are changing, and why you should care. So really just meeting people where they are and just, trying to get the point across of, why they should care about this, why this really matters.
So why does it matter? Why does it matter? I mean, I think I know why I think it matters. Why do you think it matters?
It matters because climate change is already negatively affecting something that every single person on this planet cares about. So big things are health, right? We're seeing major increases in temperature causing more heat stroke. We're seeing increases in wildfire smoke. Like we had last year, we saw how extreme that wildfire smoke was and how it spread into a different country. But the climate change is also affecting our agriculture, our growing seasons. It's impacting how long we see mosquitoes throughout the year or ticks, pests like that. And so it's really just a wide-ranging thing that's affecting us in so many different ways. We're seeing longer allergy seasons, which are really hard for people. We're seeing, in some places where it's getting too hot, schools are shutting down because they don't have sufficient AC. And talking about air conditioning, like heating and cooling your house, that's becoming much more expensive because of climate change. So there are economic things, there are environmental things, there's things with our health and our agriculture. It's really just our water resources. There's so many ways that climate change is negatively impacting us. So we all really should be paying attention.
Yeah, and as you know, here in Arizona, since 2016, every summer since then, we've seen an increase in the number of people who have perished because of the heat-related deaths.
Absolutely.
And it's a number that officials, and you talk to them here in the city of Phoenix, they would do anything if they could bring that number down this summer. And they're going to try to do anything and everything, but it's that kind of thing. The human, and those are just the folks, that doesn't even count the folks that went to emergency room visits or got sick and just didn't report it.
Right.
Because, referring to Arizona in the desert, heat's a killer.
Yep. Yeah, there's a limit to the amount of heat our body can take. It's not so much in Arizona, but bring the humidity in there too, that becomes really deadly as well.
Yep.
So we do have a limit to what we can take. And then you have things like, heat in the summer conflicting with other problems like homelessness. And then you see all these kind of problems interacting where climate change can really exacerbate already existing issues that we have.
So there's a ton of stuff that this is connected to, and now I'm feeling overwhelmed. What do I, what do I do? How do I take that information and maybe narrow it down to maybe something I can think about doing?
Yes, man, it is overwhelming, I'll tell you that. But there are some important things to remember. So first of all, it's important to remember that we know how to solve this crisis, which is kind of a rare thing. You don't always know how to solve the crisis that you're in, but this one we actually do understand how to solve it. So that's good. And second, there's no point of no return. It's never too late to start acting on climate change. And there are so many individual actions that make a difference. So how you travel, when you travel, how you heat and cool your home, where you buy things, what you buy, how you throw things away. There are all these daily things that we do that have a larger impact. But I'd say the biggest opportunities for change are really at higher levels. So, talking about things like, at corporation level, industry level, government level. So people should really remember that their voice has power. So to use your voice, definitely get involved in your communities, vote. The things that you do on a small scale all add up and they make a big difference. So people have power.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you do have to get involved. And, you talked about forest fires are a big issue in Arizona. We had a lucky year last summer for us. We didn't have as many fires, but when the smoke from Canada was getting down here, you understand that this is not just an Arizona problem or a Western U.S. problem. This is a worldwide problem.
Yes.
That fire that burned up in Eastern Canada was an amazingly bad fire.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. All the fires that we saw across Canada last summer that basically dragged out throughout the year and even past the winter, just really remarkable. And it's not necessarily the number of fires, but the number of acres that burned was just off the charts last year, absolutely off the charts. And when you think about all that smoke that's going into the air and then moving all that smoke around really populated areas, we're seeing big increases in health problems, things like asthma, stroke, heart attacks, lung disease. All these things impact us. And climate change does not respect boundaries. So it doesn't matter if you're in a different state, another country, we're all connected here,
Yeah, that is a good reminder. Kaitlyn Trudeau is with Climate Central. We've been talking about Climate Central and sort of their task at hand and what they've been trying to do. And they are very helpful to television stations. One of the things, though, that we wanted to talk about came down to the idea that we're not past the point of return. I hear that so many times that somebody will say, we'll talk about climate change or whatever it is called at that particular meeting or by that person. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, it doesn't matter. I can't do anything about it. We can't change it. It's done. That's just not true.
It's absolutely not true. It is not too late. The thing, I don't think, we can't stop climate change. It's happening now. But the degree to which the climate changes, the degree to which we're going to see suffering, the degree to which we're going to have damages and costs around the world, it matters what we do now. So if we delay, we're only bringing on more cost, more damages, and more deaths. So it's never too late, never too late.
So we were talking again earlier this week when we chatted on the phone a little bit about pushback on climate change. And you were saying that at least some of the research that you've been seeing recently, that you think there's actually a little bit less pushback than even a decade ago on this whole idea that climate's changing and that it's human caused and we got to do something about it. Is that true?
Yeah, so we've got these great partners at Yale, the program on climate communication, and George Mason University. They do this great social science research on climate change. And they've been looking for over a decade now at US adults and just kind of asking them basic questions. And when you ask them how many people or how many people think that global warming is happening. 72% of adults in the US think that global warming is happening. That's a huge amount. And it wasn't always that high. So we've really come a long way. But then what they also do is they look at US adults and they kind of put them into something they call the 6 Americas. And it's basically putting people into 6 different groups of how you feel about global warming or climate change. And it goes from dismissive, which is the group that is like, doesn't care, not interested, doesn't want to talk about it, all the way up to the group that's alarmed. And they're like, it's important now, we got to do something right away. And when we look at how the US adults kind of span out in that in those 6 groups, we see that most adults in the United States are either concerned or alarmed about global warming. So that's most of the US adults in America. Most of us are either concerned or alarmed, which are the 2 top groups. So most of us really care. But there's also, like about 30%, 32% that ranges in between, they're kind of doubtful, maybe they're disengaged, maybe they're cautious. So they're still kind of figuring it out. But when you look at how many people are like disengaged there, don't want to talk about it, you can't give them any facts, it's only like 11% of the adults in this country, which is really a small number. And it's gotten smaller over time, but as more people become alarmed, more people become concerned, that's really the direction we want to go. And I think that there's this narrative out there that no one believes it's true, or people don't want to talk about it. They're not interested. They don't think that we can do anything. And I think that that's really a false narrative.
And this study seems to indicate that there's as you say, most Americans are either alarmed or concerned about climate change, and that should translate into political clout at some point, wouldn't you think?
You'd think. At Climate Central, I'll say, we're strictly non-advocacy, so we don't look into the political side of things.
I understand that.
But just, as an individual person, I'd say, yeah, I would think that would interact. But I think it's really, you have a concerted effort by certain groups to kind of stir up the misinformation, the disinformation about climate science and climate change. So it's not just about facts. It's not simply about just giving someone this information. I wish it were that simple. But, some people you're not going to be able to reach. But I don't think we should get stuck on that, because really most people care. Most people want to do something about this. Most people are concerned. So, and I mean, talking about it, like, this is one of the best things you can do. Talk to your neighbors, talk to people in your community, talk to your family members, talk about what's happening, how it's impacting your life, because the more we talk about it, the more that we're going to be able to come together and solve it.
So people ask me a lot of times because it's not me, how scientists figure out each year if it's been the hottest year on the planet, and then how they can compare that to not only 20 years ago when we had a fair amount of data, but even decades ago when we didn't have so much data. How is that? First of all, is most of this current stuff done via satellite, remote sensing?
Satellites, they're part of observational data, but we also have station-based data. So weather station-based data across the world, we've had it for over 100 years. It's our main bread and butter, our observational data. Satellite data, we've had, 40 to 50 years. So that's like a secondary, but really it's our weather stations. We have like tens of thousands of stations all across the world that have been reporting for a very long time. But in addition to the observational data, which is the station, the satellite data, we also have what we call proxy records. And those are basically natural records. So things like tree rings, things like ice cores, lake sediments. All of these things actually record the temperature inside them naturally. So we can look back millions of years and actually see what the temperature was like. So that's how we know not only that we've seen this crazy warming over the last 150-ish years, but it's like unlike anything we've seen. I think it's like 200,000 or 800,000. We can go back millions of years and look at what the temperatures were thanks to these natural proxy records.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Tree rings in Arizona, the University of Arizona does a lot of that down in southern Arizona on the Sky Islands. They have a famous tree called Bigelow 224, which has been sampled for, I want to say, 25 plus years now. But Bigelow 224 gave them a big shock this year because we did have one of the hottest summers and driest summers here in Arizona. And the ring that developed for the year was like none other they had ever seen. It just basically stopped growing for a while. And it was pretty disturbing to the scientists who watched that tree and watched that grove of trees, that it was that hot and that dry that the trees, ponderosa pines, just said, nope, we're done. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and that tree and others in the area there go back and give climatologists a record of what happened just by how wide that ring is, and here's something I also learned: the different way the cells line up, and if there's more compact cells, or so it's a really cool science. But,
so cool.
But I can tell from what I been researching on tree rings just recently, folks, I can tell you it's cool and it works. It really works.
Yeah.
And you can tell a lot about what's been happening in the last 50 years in southern Arizona on tree rings. So it's that kind of data that leads us to brings us to conclusions. But like, for instance, it was announced this year that it was the hottest year on record for the planet. So is that all that data, surface stations, remote sensing satellites? Is it just everything crunched together, put into a formula, and that's how it comes out?
So for the records, when we say it's the warmest year on record, we're talking about in the observational records.
Okay.
So that's not including any of the proxy things. That's just basically saying over the last 150-ish years, we've been directly recording temperature. It's the hottest we've seen. And that's when they, make those announcements. They're talking about the observational record. There are other studies that actually pull back even farther, and they can show you when temperatures were the last time the temperatures were this high. So temperatures have been this high before, but not when we've been around.
Yeah, right.
And so it's depending on when you look back. But when people say it's the hottest year on record, it is the hottest year in our observational record, which is about 150 years now. And that's really remarkable. And it's not just by a little bit, it's by a lot. So we're really seeing these temperatures where you kind of wonder, is there ever going to be like a normal again? Because we keep breaking records. How are we going to have this normal? How are we going to prepare for tomorrow when we can no longer use the past to really gauge what we need to do? I mean, it's a really remarkable time.
Yeah, and and the other thing is emissions into the atmosphere correlate so closely to the rise in temperature. It's amazing when you put those graphs together.
Yes, and we have known this. We've known about the relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature since the 1800s. So it is not something that's new. It's not something we just figured out. We've known this for a long, long time. And even back in the late 1800s, they were predicting that winters would be warming faster than summers, that days or the nights would be warming faster than days. And those things have been coming true. We've been seeing those hypotheses playing out in our lifetime, which is really incredible. So we've known about this for a long time, and it is solid science.
Yeah, it kind of makes me crazy because in the 1980s and 1990s, we were debating whether it was happening, and there were, I don't know if it was 50-50 scientists on one side or the other, but it was being debated: climate change, no climate change; global warming, no global warming, and it was being debated. And the interesting thing to me is the modelers were doing their very best, and they've continued to do their very best. Yet, if anything, it seems to me, if anything you could say about their models is they were too conservative, because things have really gone faster than they thought.
Yes, and people need to remember with models, I mean, they're not crystal balls.
Right.
And one thing that's really uncertain with the models, one thing we don't know, no matter how great we become or how great models we build, we don't know what humans are going to do. And so that really impacts the model a lot, because how much carbon dioxide we emit now into the future will have a huge impact on what happens. So it's really hard to know what people do. That's why we have different kinds of scenarios. We have different scenarios to say, okay, is this a business as usual, or is this a scenario where we actually cut back a lot? Because that is a huge variable there in those models.
Yeah, that's for sure. So we do want to talk a little bit about Arizona. We have, we have a ton of issues facing us. But number one is, let's talk about the heat, because the heat, you guys did a really great series of graphics after the summer. We had the hottest summer on record for Phoenix, but you also did it for Tucson, Flagstaff, Prescott, I believe, was included. And people will sometimes say around the valley, well, it's all getting hotter because of the urban heat effect. Well, yes, that is some of it. That absolutely is some of what's happening around Phoenix. But would it be safe to say if you're seeing the same rises in more rural areas like Prescott and Flagstaff, and well, Tucson's not really rural, but they had rises as well, that kind of makes the case for there's a lot of warming going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, urban heat island, definitely a thing. It definitely causes our cities to become warmer, not trying to, take any attention away from that because it is a big issue. But you're seeing warming all over the place, not just urban cities. You're seeing it in really rural areas. And you're not just seeing it in one location or two locations. You're seeing it around the world. And maybe it'll be somewhere, maybe you live somewhere where you're going to have a cold year. And then maybe the next year might be a little cold, maybe the next year might be really hot. Or year to year, like it varies because we do have natural variability within the climate system that determines that year to year. But when you look at the longer scales, you look at the longer trends and you look back, you're seeing warming across the globe and by significant amounts. So, it's not just in cities, but we're also, when we do these graphics as well, it's important to remember that when we say, there's been a 5-degree increase in temperature since 1970, we're not saying that all of that 5 degrees is only from human-caused climate change. Mm-hmm. That's just the observational change. That's just what we see, the difference. But a big part of that is climate change. A huge part of that is human-caused climate change. But it's by far not the only thing. Things like population growth, urban heat, how we develop our cities, all these things play a role in heating at a local scale.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, that's for sure. Also, on the question of Arizona, it seems like we are, first of all, we're a state that's always boom or bust in terms of rain and snow. Always has been, always will be. But it almost seems like over the last 20 to 30 years, it's even been crazier ups and downs. Drier dries and wetter wets. And is that a trend that we can expect more of?
Yes, that is a trend we can expect more of with climate change. The dry places are going to get drier and the wet places are going to get wetter. And it's not just overall as a place, the storms, like these storms that we're having, warmer air can hold more moisture. So as temperatures increase, the amount of moisture that the air can hold increases. So we're starting to see heavier downpours because warmer air can just hold more water. So when we do have those wet storms, you're going to see much heavier downpours, but we're also going to see drier dries. Climate change really exacerbates conditions like that. So it just makes them a lot worse. And in places like Arizona, places in the west and southwest where you depend so heavily on snowpack for water, we're seeing our snowpack decrease as well. And it's not just that we're seeing less snow. When its temperatures rise, you get more rain instead of more snow, but we're also seeing a shift in when we get snow. So it's not only changing that seasonal timing, it's also decreasing the length of the snow season just generally. And we've been seeing an increase in heat streaks during the winter. So we'll see some snow and then we'll get a really, really hot day that will melt a bunch of that snow, or it'll start that snowpack runoff and just mess with the timing of Mother Nature. So we're seeing snowpack as one of the big ways that's really impacting the West because it's really reducing our ability to have dependable water resources.
Yeah, and it's something that we're going to be dealing with. Here in Arizona, we had a pretty decent snow a couple of weeks ago. We got our snowpack in Arizona a little bit above average. So it's kind of like, okay, we're good for a year to fill up some reservoirs. But there ain't no guarantees past that, I can tell you that.
Yeah, year to year again, we might see a big year one year. That doesn't mean that we need to put our guard down. That means we still need to be vigilant because we have to be thinking over this longer term period. Yes, you may get one year where you have a lot of snow. Maybe you get one year that's really wet, but the long term trend shows us that those kinds of things are becoming less reliable, and we have to be preparing ourselves for a future of less water.
So I'm going to ask you about the atmospheric river because it didn't impact Arizona a lot this year, but it really crushed portions of the Northwest and California. And there's a perception, because there was so much rain and snow as well, but so much rain, there's a perception that, all right, there's no water issues in California anymore. Is that a correct perception?
It's definitely not. These atmospheric rivers that we got this year and last year were beneficial in a lot of ways. I mean, we didn't have a lot of fires. It's been a pretty low fire season the last couple of years because of all that rain and moisture that we got. But that's kind of a smaller thing when you look at the pros and cons. The cons are much larger. You see, these atmospheric rivers cause so much damage. I think it's like 80% of the flooding damages out west come from atmospheric rivers. These things are dangerous, and our infrastructure is not built for these kinds of storms. So you're seeing power outages, you're seeing people's homes like fall into sinkholes, you're seeing roads break, bridges collapse. We're not built for this kind of climate that we're seeing now and that we have in the future. So it's something we have to keep remembering, is that, we might get a little more rain, we might get a lot more rain, and that might be good for one reason or another. But overall, the cons definitely outweigh the pros.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy too. All the rain that it's and the flooding that has occurred over there this year, and people losing their homes, because of mudslides and everything like that. It's just amazing. So I want to kind of wrap this up a little bit, but with a sort of maybe a climate central or a Kaitlyn Trudeau outlook over the next 5 to 10 years. Where could we be with this thing, climate change? Can we have started to turn the corner by then? Can we slow it down by then? Can we get a handle on it by then in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I'll say my specialty is more looking at historical observations and not modeling the future.
Right.
But I can tell you what I hope is going to be seen in the next 5 to 10 years.
Please.
And I hope that people kind of really hold on to the fact that their voices matter. And this seems like such a huge thing, seems too big for any one of us to be able to fix or solve. But we have power in numbers, and so many people care about this. So many people care. And so we can cause really good things to happen. We can cause a slowdown of the worst effects, but we're going to have to use our voice, and we're going to have to act in ways that will match our voice,
Well, Kaitlyn, with people like you and organizations like Climate Central, I think we are going to be able, I will predict the future and say we are going to be able to turn that corner with the good information you guys supply and the energy that you bring to the table on the topic. And Kaitlyn, I just really appreciate talking with you today, talking about Climate Central and what you do. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And what I'll say, we couldn't do it without local meteorologists like you. You guys really are on the front lines, really taking the brunt force of this. And really, you are the trusted messengers that are helping make this change in this country. So we appreciate you and the opportunity to talk about our work.
Excellent. And we'll be checking back with you guys from time to time. Great. So Kaitlyn, you have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Yep.
This is Beyond the Green Screen, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.